Hello listeners, Jordan here. I just want to let you know that you can listen to Nighttime early and ad-free on Amazon Music. Include it with Prime.
You are listening to the Nighttime Podcast.
Hello listeners. Tonight's story is going to be one of the select few that justifies a quick warning like this up front. We're going to be discussing one of Canada's worst acts of domestic violence, a story that's going to include cruelty, suicide, and crimes against children. It starts in Saskatchewan during April of 2015. Something horrible happens in the mobile home that 23-year-old Steve O'Shaughnessy shares with his girlfriend, 27-year-old Latasha Gosling. The couple were going through something between a rough patch and a breakup, but for reasons we still don't understand, the situation escalates to unimaginable heights, resulting in a quadruple murder-suicide. Many of the details of this case remain out of reach for the public as no trial was to be necessary, but what is known shows us the terrifying, final cruel acts of a jealous and deranged man. In this episode of Nighttime, Madeleine Klein and I are going to be discussing the case of family annihilator Steve O'Shaughnessy and the Tisdale tragedy.
This is the mobile home in Tisdale where the RCMP found the bodies of Latasha Gosling and her 3 children, 8-year-old Janika, 7-year-old Landon, and 4-year-old Janaea. Police say that they were reported missing yesterday, and that's when they came to the home to check on them, and they found the bodies. Grief counselors and a crisis team are here at the local school both today and tomorrow. Meanwhile, the RCMP continue to investigate, both here in Tisdale and in Prince Albert. That's where the man believed to have killed his family was found dead this morning. He had with him another infant, and all we know at this point is that the child was unharmed and is being cared for by family.
Ms. Madeleine Klein, it's September, the kids are back in school, my COVID is slowly fading away. It's safe to say we're back.
Thank God. It was a weird summer for, scheduling and everything.
Yeah. Well, let's get into it here. We have a heavy story to discuss. This one has a little bit of everything awful. It's going to involve domestic violence, a brutal end. It's going to involve crimes against children, which are something I actively try not to cover on this show, but this story certainly has a lot of it. This is a dark one. This is
a very dark one, but it's also very close to where I live, and I can't believe I hadn't heard of it before you brought it up. Like I don't even kind of remember it happening.
Mm-hmm. You are in Regina, Saskatchewan.
I am.
This takes place in the town of Tisdale, Saskatchewan, which is, as I understand, a small agricultural town with a population of about 3,000 people. That's about 200 kilometers from Saskatoon.
Yeah.
So this 3,000 people is a tiny little town. Those are the kind of towns where when you drive through them, you don't even realize you drove through a town.
That's correct.
Maybe there was a turnoff.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like 3.5 hours away from me. So, and I have driven through it. So.
Okay. Yeah. And it's much like many rural communities. It's a place for hunting, fishing, camping, outdoorsy stuff, which will kind of come into this ever so slightly as we get going here. But one thing I know, of course, I pay a lot of attention to Canadian news. The only thing I knew about Tisdale is that it had a viral moment where the town had its own, it's had a motto.
I think I told you this.
Yes, it was you. They were Tisdale, the land of rape and honey.
Well, I remember when they decided to finally change that slogan. I remember it was in the news and it was just like, oh my God. And I think it wasn't that long ago. It was like maybe 2016, 2017.
Yeah.
And it's like,
I can't believe it took them that long.
Tisdale, Saskatchewan is finally thinking of changing the words on its welcome sign. And no, it's not because people think of the Disney Channel actress. Believe me, that would be a way better thing to come into people's minds. The website for the Canadian town makes it look like a charming place. There's idyllic pictures of the hospital, the hockey arena, the golf course, the museum. And down at the bottom, there's the town of Tisdale's slogan, the land of rape and honey. Though it sounds both felonious and filthy, rape actually refers to rapeseed, the vibrant yellow crop in the region that's harvested to make an edible oil and renamed, for obvious marketing reasons, canola. But town officials, tired of having to explain this over and over to people who are confused at best and outraged at worst, think it finally might be time to change the slogan and are surveying the 3,200 residents to see what they think.
Tisdale finds its moment, but as you will hear when we get into the conversation tonight, Tisdale, just like its nearby community of Humboldt, another small community in Saskatchewan, one thing they both have in common is being the setting for a horrific and horrible tragedy that tore the town apart and will never be forgotten by anyone in those communities.
The Humboldt tragedy still, even in Regina, you still see people with like car stickers that say Humboldt strong, and yeah.
Well, let's meet some of the people in this story, and we'll get through it that way. So the main character that we're going to be following is Steve O'Shaughnessy. He's a 23-year-old oil fields worker. And not only oil fields worker, but like oil fields fan. One thing I saw is photographs of him where he has a big oil rig tattooed on his arm. That's, when I think of like a cop, they become their job.
Yeah.
A mailman in the community, it's like even when he's not delivering mail or she's not delivering mail, they're still the mailman. You don't usually have that kind of connection to the oil rig work.
Or any job, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Like I'm trying to think of a job that I would like or love so much that I would get it tattooed, but whatever blows your skirt up, I guess.
Yeah. Western Canada is it's a big oil thing out there. Like that's a huge industry. Here on the East Coast, I'm more used to people going out west to work on the oil fields and come back. I'm imagining you probably have a lot of friends who do that kind of work out there,
Yeah,
right?
oil and like construction at the it's not really construction, but we have an upgrader in the city as well. So like I remember my parents when all of us kids were old and like I think only two of us still lived at home. They used to rent out our basement bedroom to guys that would come to the city to work refinery shutdowns. And one guy was from Newfoundland.
Okay.
Yeah, he got brought home once by the cops because he drank too much.
That sounds about right. So Steve Shaughnessy, 23 years old. He's living in the town of Tisdale with his older girlfriend, 27-year-old Latasha Gosling, she was still married, but she's been estranged from her husband for several years. And in the home there, they were living in Tisdale in a trailer. It was Steve, Latasha. She had 3 children from her prior marriage, and together the pair had a 6-month-old baby. My first thought in hearing that is that's a whole lot of people in a trailer.
Yes, that's a whole lot of people anywhere.
Old in there. That's true. This trailer, they were renting it at like kind of like a trailer park. Had been living there for about 8 months, so just under a year. And again, the people in the house, other than the 23-year-old Steve, 27-year-old Latasha, there was Latasha's 8-year-old daughter, Janika, 7-year-old son, Landon, 4-year-old daughter, Janaya, and again, they had a 6-month-old baby together named Kenley. As far as the couple, again, the dynamic is going to be interesting, just with the fact that she's still married and estranged. Although, like, I know that happens a lot. This idea, like, we're going to get divorced eventually. It's just, he won't sign the papers or whatever it may be. I'm sure there's legal costs associated with that as well.
Oh, totally.
But living in the home together with the blended family with the children, 6-month-old baby thrown in there. It must have been an odd situation, but people in that community described them as a normal family that seemed to get along well. The kids seemed to be happy. Neighbors remarked at seeing them playing outside and, just like a regular family with a bunch of
just normal
regular kids.
Yeah.
Steve as well appeared to be very involved in the lives of the children. For a while, at least, when they first all got together, the 3 children were said to have called and referred to Steve as Dad. I believe their biological father for a period of time wasn't in their life. And Steve put himself out there so much with these kids that's how he was viewed as, even referred to as Dad.
And I guess there's like lots of Instagram posts that he posted of just like teaching one how to ride a bike. And yeah, he was just very involved.
And as a 23-year-old, that's
a lot to take on.
Yeah, that's surprising me. Like if I was, I'm just thinking when I was 23, and think I was probably an average to an above average as far as responsibility goes, 23, I'd have a hard time being like, you got three kids? Like, yeah, I'm gonna raise them. I'll step up.
Well, and if you think about it, he was 23 at the time of this incident. So let's say they'd been together for 2 years. He was 21
Hmm.
when they got together.
Hmm.
So he was even younger.
One side of the of his personality is what we hear from the reports of the neighbors that he seemed like a great guy, everything seemed okay. But a lot of people close to them had another story. Steve was said to be controlling of Latasha, as well as jealous of her, but specifically jealous of her husband, the guy she was estranged from. I couldn't find any examples of exactly what he did or how this came out, but it seemed to be whenever he became involved, the biological father got back in the kid's life, and whenever she'd be on the phone with him or he'd show up to see the kids or something, it seemed like that was a thing he did not enjoy. But in this case, I had a hard time finding a lot of specific examples of, how that manifested itself in reality.
Well, and some people just don't like their partner's ex.
Mm.
And I think if you're not if you're dating somebody with children, you have to accept the fact that the ex is probably going to be involved in some way, shape, or form.
Mhm.
Like you kind of got to
Yeah.
get over that and put that aside for the kids. But he was young and we don't know details either. So
Yeah. The biological father of the three eldest children, his name is Jason. And Jason and Latasha, they had met in 2005, married in 2008. I couldn't find exactly when they separated, but it seemed to not be very long before she got involved with Steve O'Shaughnessy. I couldn't find exact amounts, but this all happened fairly quickly. As far as Latasha's life, I think the one thing that really comes up a lot if you read about her and what she was up to in the lead up to this tragedy is she started a Facebook group that was all geared towards connecting other women who were going through divorces or were separated. And they were just kind of, the way Facebook groups work. They're just sharing kind of their experiences and almost serving as a support group for each other. And after this event, after the tragedy occurs, a lot of the people who speak out on her behalf are close friends that she made in this Facebook group that she talked to about everything all day. That was like a huge part of her life was this network of other divorced or separated women that that she had connected. And I think that's a beautiful thing.
absolutely. That's one of the positives of social media and the internet
Mhm.
is you can find just like-minded people and make like real friendships, even though you've never met in person.
Yeah, but using it for like as a support group for
Yes.
that specific issue is I think that's a good use of social media. That's what it
Yeah.
should be used for, not arguing about politics and whatever else that we do on there most of the time.
Well, and back in those years, let's say 2013, 2014, 2015, she was probably one of the original Facebook groups for such a thing. Because
Mhm.
they're very popular now, but they weren't always.
So let's move on to when things start to go wrong. Again, the neighbors describe this situation at the house at the trailer as normal. Everything seems to be all right. But there is an incident a couple days before the tragedy. It seems to be some kind of domestic incident between Steve and Latasha that involves screaming and shouting. A police response, somebody called the cops, the police showed up. But whatever happened, it wasn't enough that anyone was charged or anyone was taken away. It was just enough that it was out of the ordinary and the police responded and at least went up to the door and asked a few questions. As far as what happened that led to that and what became of it, we don't know what led to it. What became of it, nothing after the fact, although I'm sure that interaction is something that investigators looked into, only a week or so later. But something that was going on at the time between Latasha and Steve that may be related is Latasha had confided in others, women through this Facebook group mainly, that she was planning to leave Steve, that things were going well. And it was also said that Steve was believed to have had an affair, and she had found out about it.
Yeah, that'll do it. That, yeah.
Most commonly shared version of the story is that it was a woman that Steve had worked with in some capacity. Things were going on between them. Latasha found out about it, and that was going to be the end of it. But again, when like I don't think like that breakup is going to be complicated when you have living together, it's a small community in a trailer. You have a 6-month-old together, the other children in there. I have a feeling whatever this domestic incident that occurred in the house was days before the tragedy, I have a feeling that that was likely to do with her finding out about this affair.
There's no doubt in my mind. What else would it be?
Mm-hmm. So where we're at now in the story is the night the police come, that was just, I think it was 3 days before what I'm referring to as the Tisdale tragedy. We're going to get to that day now, and it's before we kind of walk through the timeline of what happens. It's important to say right now that there's so much we don't know about what happened because Steve will never have the opportunity to answer for what he did or explain what happened, as well as the police have never released publicly their findings of what happened in this house. But what we know for sure is at some point during the morning of Tuesday, April 21st, which again, 2015, Steve O'Shaughnessy murdered Latasha Gosling and murdered 3 of their children, her 3 children from the prior relationship. He did this in the trailer in Tisdale and fled the house after doing so with the 6-month-old baby. He actually fled to Prince Albert, Saskatchewan, where his parents lived. That's about, I think it's like an hour and a half away.
It's not too far, but far enough, I guess.
This happens in the house. Steve kills her 3 children from the prior marriage. He flees to his parents' house with the baby. That happened some point early in the day. But again, police aren't called until later that afternoon. And there are actually 2 separate calls to police. And I think walking through how they find out about this is interesting. The first call comes in to police about 5:40 p.m. A friend of Latasha's reports that they can't get in touch with her. And it was something where they spoke every single day. So this friend simply not being able to reach Latasha and knowing Latasha was going through some hard times, not being able to reach her was enough of a fright that led them to call the police and say, you need to look into this. I can't get a hold of my friend Latasha, and that's unusual.
Well, and she had 2 school-age children. So they probably also weren't at school. So that was probably a big red flag. It's Tisdale. Everyone sees everyone in the morning or, on their regular routines. So yeah, that was probably a big red flag.
Red flag, yes, but nothing like the call they get that evening. She can walk us through the other call to police, the one that gets them to rush to the scene of the trailer.
I don't know when this call came in, but Jason, the ex-husband, ended up calling police as he had received photos from Steve O'Shaughnessy of the bodies of his now deceased children. And wife. So
yeah, Steve
murdered the family and then to somehow make it worse, sent photos to Jason, to the ex-husband and biological father, which is
and it
just beyond.
Ugh. It is certainly it's like something from a horror movie. It's the most unimaginably horrific thing, and to make it even worse, like to give a sense of how cruel this was.
Cruel is the most perfect word.
Yeah, the father's birthday was the next day when Steve sent the photos. It was, I don't know the exact words he said, but it was sent to him as, "I got a birthday present for you. Here's your birthday present." And it was the photos of, his 3 children and wife that he's separated from, deceased, murdered violently. So, of course, Jason phones the police. Jason rushes to the trailer. The police rush to the trailer. When they get there, this part surprises me. I would have thought, given these photos being sent, maybe there was a question, are they real? But I would have thought the police or him would have just kicked the door down of the trailer and went in there.
Right.
But that's not what happened. What they did was the RCMP phoned the owner of the trailer that Steve and Latasha were renting from and said, like, yeah, I'm at the trailer. We're trying to get in here. Do you got a key for this? And this call comes in like after midnight to this guy, and he's like, "Yeah, I'll drive over. I got a spare key." So they wait for the landlord to drive over there. He described to the media showing up to give the cop the keys, and the children's father, Jason, is on the scene, like flipping out, of course.
He showed great restraint in that moment. Restraint, and that's actually very smart that he didn't just like barge in, because he obviously knew it was a crime scene. But that's like good on him for keeping as calm as he could have.
Yeah, I can't imagine, because I think if that was, it's you can't imagine what you would do in that situation. But I think I would be hoping and praying that the photos were fake for some reason. So I would want to get into the house to see that they were fake.
Right.
I think that's where my mind would be, and I'd be like, I don't care. Like, I'm just going to kick the door down. You can arrest me after, but I need to see that my 3 kids.
Well,
are
and like
okay.
even the cops, how is that not probable cause? Between the phone call that came in earlier in the evening reporting these 4 people missing, and then these horrific photos from the ex, like just take the door down.
Yeah, and I would like to know what the rest of what the ex said was.
Yeah.
Like, because if you get those photos with this cryptic message and they're not responding to you, calling them or texting them back, that to me, yeah, like, please kick the door down. I'm okay with the $700 door or whatever it is. But yeah, as I was reading the timeline of this, I was just surprised that they went as far as to get the landlord to come down with the spare key.
And the fact that the landlord did, good on him.
Mm-hmm.
I sleep with my phone on silent, so.
That's a good point. So that call goes to the landlord just after midnight. He shows up just about 1 a.m. As you can imagine, when they enter the home, they find the bodies of Latasha and her 3 children. Steve and the youngest, the 6-month-old, are nowhere to be found. And that is when a very short manhunt begins. If you're looking for a 23-year-old guy, the first place, if he's not at his place, probably the second place you'd think to look is his parents' house.
That's generally where you would go, because where else would he go? I think he was just living in Tisdale. Well. He obviously wasn't from Tisdale.
No, that's right. Well, he was from Prince Albert, where like the house that he went to, I believe, is the home he grew up in, his parents' place. The police go there 6 a.m. that they figure out like who Steve is, where he's from, where he may be. They go to his parents' house at 6 a.m. When they go to the door, the parents answer. They're fine, but Steve and the baby are in a room in the house. When the police go to that room, they find Steve dead by suicide, and thank goodness, with one stroke of mercy, with the only piece of mercy in this whole story, Steve's 6-month-old baby was unharmed.
Like, that poor little baby. I hope she wasn't in distress. And it was just like snoozing away.
Yeah, poor little baby, but also like poor young adult. Like this baby's life will be so complicated. But I think, like, yes, it was merciful and it was positive that one person managed to survive this, but it does show like the cruelty and the evil of Steve targeting her kids, taking out himself, but sparing his own child.
I don't know. It's terrible. It's so terrible. And he probably, when he showed up to his parents, he was probably like, oh yeah, like Latasha and I got into a fight and I left with the baby. And they had like okay, no idea.
Yeah. Stay here for the night. He goes in the room, and I have a feeling like since the police showed up at the trailer around midnight is when they called the landlord and stuff. I have a feeling that Steve probably sent those photos maybe a half hour before the police are actually trying to get into the trailer. So I would imagine Steve, and I also believe Steve arrived at his parents' house that
Yeah.
afternoon. So he must have spent the evening there as if everything was normal. Late at night, he sends these photos, and probably sometime shortly after that is when he takes his own life. And yeah, like you say, hopefully the baby just slept through the whole thing.
Well, and this got me wondering. So she's only 6 months old. I wonder if, even though like she doesn't really know what's going on in her surroundings, if seeing something like that would do something to your psyche. Like
Mm.
she obviously, like, she's 6 months old. She's definitely not going to remember it, but does it have an effect on the brain?
I
Yeah.
wonder. I think what certainly will is, the survivor's guilt that she'll
Yes.
likely experience. And then just think about this and just the psychology of this is that like this is also Latasha's kid. Latasha's parents and siblings and friends and family will love this kid because it's Latasha's kid. And the only thing of Latasha that remains on this earth is this one of the four children that she had. So they will love this kid, but the kid is also half the father who did this horrible thing. So it's almost like it's such a burden to put on everybody, especially so that
Yeah.
child. But you can't hold the child's parents against the child,
No, no, no. Yeah, it's
So it like I just as I was playing all this out, I'm just thinking like how hard that must
well,
be.
and you can't just not tell her because we're talking about Tisdale, PA. It's a small town. And unless you just remove her altogether into a new city far, far away and just lie about what happened to her parents, she's gonna find
Mm.
out.
But yeah, oh, of course. But even that would be unfair because Steve's parents should have like this is Steve's kid too.
Right.
So his parents like will want to
Oh,
like it's the baby's grandparents, and
that's
they did nothing. So
that's true. I didn't even think of
it
that
just
part.
like when you hear of a case of family annihilation, like this is, it's typically everybody goes. But in this case, there's one person that remains, and that one person keeps everybody connected,
Yeah.
but also gives everybody the last remaining connection to their deceased loved ones. And like Steve's parents, like Steve did a horrible thing, but his parents, they will go on to issue a statement explaining maybe what why this had happened, but in support of Steve to an extent. So it's like this is so complicated that the tragedy of what happened is one thing, but it's something that of course these families are going to live with
Right. Well, and
forever.
you just like you don't have to approve or like of everything your child does, but you never stop loving your child.
Yeah, that's true. But in Steve's case, it involves mental health issues. Like it is said that by people close to him, specifically family members, that he suffered with mental health issues, but had no history of violence. That he wasn't violent,
That
but
they know of.
yeah, that they know of, but had some kind of mental health issues. But then again, I've heard people close to Latasha saying he was borderline abusive, controlling, manipulative. She was scared of him. So we don't know where the truth is. And because he dies right after this event, there's no trial or big inquiry into what happened. So
They
it's
didn't talk to
in a
any
way this
ex-girlfriends. They didn't, because there was
no,
really no
no
need.
one was up on the stand. It was, yeah, it was just done.
Yeah.
And because of that, like even when researching it, there's not a lot written about this case, which I think is a bad thing because anything that involves domestic violence, especially these extreme examples, like I think it's people should know the outcomes of how these stories can and sometimes do end. And like this is the worst case scenario where his I could only assume like jealousy and anger towards Latasha and her ex-husband led him to kill the kids and send pictures. And like, and that man Jason, he lives with the memory of seeing these photos. Like
Like
that's so
you don't come
brutal.
back from something like that. But I think the affair thing, there is merit to that. And she was probably going to leave him, and that also set him off. They say that sometimes people hear of domestic violence situations and they say, well, just leave. But sometimes leaving is more dangerous. And this is a really good example of that.
Yeah, certainly. And it's like, and I think had there had been a trial in this case, if he had survived his suicide attempt and there was a trial, that interaction with the police 2 or 3 nights prior would certainly become, there'd be a hard look at what was said and done and why they got there, what they did about it. And that hasn't happened, of course. We know nothing about, the public knows nothing about what led them to go there, which I think maybe there's nothing would come out of it, but just the idea that they may have had a chance to prevent this. And, I don't know, maybe they did everything right at that house that night.
Well,
but
hindsight's always 2020. No one could have predicted something this horrible would happen.
I want to talk a bit more about Steve O'Shaughnessy's family statements, because it's not typical that in a case like this you're going to have the killer's family publicly advocating for you and expressing their feelings on it. So I'll read a bit about this. He has a sister named Selena. She made a post on Facebook first, and it said, I'll read it to you here. She says, "Our family is having a very, very tough time. I miss my brother already, and no one knew him like we did. He was a loving, kind-hearted soul who always looked out for me. I loved him before, and I still love him now." She wrote that after the murders. She also elaborated a little bit more by saying, he had serious mental health issues, and we've been trying to get him help. So it seems like his family was aware things weren't well. And, I've heard a million stories of people trying to get help for someone else and hitting brick walls.
Yeah.
I don't know what walls the family must have hit, but at least according to his sister, they tried to do something.
Well, and like I just said, no one could have, especially with how his family views him now, they knew he had mental health problems, but they never in a million years thought that this would be the outcome. I don't think anyone did.
Mm.
No one assumes
Yeah,
that their loved one is going to be a family annihilator.
Certainly not. Yeah, I think most people would think, I hope he doesn't accidentally, I hope he doesn't get arrested for some crazy incident over there,
Right.
like pushed her or something.
Yeah, or I was going to say hitting her or somehow getting physical, but they
Yeah.
definitely didn't think this guy's going to kill his wife and family,
Everybody.
or his girlfriend and family.
The actual, whatever rage occurred in the trailer that led to him doing this, that was one moment of rage. But if hours later he sends these photos,
Yeah.
it's like it was something that was ongoing. And I'm assuming, or maybe he sent them that morning and Jason didn't read his texts until that night. And that's a possibility. But if it was actually sent in the evening, then that would kind of show that rage went on all day, or maybe came back, or maybe it was his just last FU before he took his own life.
Yeah, this is where mental health comes in again, because I imagine he was just sitting in his parents' basement stewing over what had happened. He knew that his only way out was to take himself out, and his last, if he did send him later, of course, that was the last. Oh, I just couldn't imagine.
Yeah, and I think even doing what he did to himself, ending his own life that way, is also a bit of an FU, because it's like he's not to be held accountable. He's not to answer any questions about what he did. I'm sure the family would know a lot more than the public does, but about as far as what actually happened in the house, there's been no information shared publicly about that. But I think one can use their imaginations, where if you look at his social media, he had lots of photos of hunting and firearms type stuff in the context of deer hunting. So I would expect him to be someone who would have access to firearms, or at least be comfortable around them.
Yeah, regardless of how it happened, I don't want to think about how it happened. What a horrible scene.
I mentioned that his family issued a statement. So I read some stuff that his sister wrote on Facebook, but there's actually an official statement released by the family. If you have it in front of you, you want to read it?
I do. So the family statement is as follows. It says, We are shocked and deeply saddened by the tragic events in Tisdale and Prince Albert. Our thoughts and prayers go out to the victim's family and friends. There are no words to express how terrible we feel for the loss of life and ensuing grief. Stephen had no history of violence. However, he had ongoing struggles with mental health issues. The Gosling family does not deserve this. We will likely never know why this senseless act occurred. At this time, more than ever, we are turning to the support of our family and friends to begin the healing process. Was that the right? Did I read the right one?
Yeah, I think overall, that's about what I'd expect.
Yeah.
I think it's more than what's typical, but it's what I would expect. I think I would be really interested to know more about him and these mental health
Me
struggles.
too.
Because if he doesn't have a history of violence, it's just odd that the mental health struggles would eventually turn him into committing the most violent act.
Right.
So like what unless his struggles up to now were, I would have expected them to be like rage, he'd flip out, he was had a temper. It doesn't seem, at least according to that statement, it doesn't seem to be the case, but
But that's also his
I would read.
family. Like,
Yeah, that's true. It's true. Like what you want to hear from is like, someone who kind of worked with him a little
mhm.
bit, or someone who just like not his close friend, but someone who was kind of acquainted with him pretty well, and they'd have probably a pretty good idea of what happened.
Like I
But
said before, ex-girlfriend, that could probably provide a
yeah,
good window into that. And usually
yeah,
well hidden mental health issues result in suicide, which is tragic. But like there had to have been some sort of writing on the wall. Someone doesn't
I
just
would
snap
think
like that.
maybe that's wishful thinking though. I can't imagine that something like this can just happen out of the blue
Right.
without any warning signs, something this horrific and violent, and that an average, like that some depressed person could, that could lead you to doing something as cruel as killing, the children and sending photos to their father that maybe you're a little like, I don't want Latasha to get back together. Like, this is a pretty extreme. If I can't have you, no one can.
Yes. And like that adds such a cruel and just
Mm.
so much more terrible layer to things.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because and even the I can't have you, no one can. That would be to target
That's
Latasha.
right.
To get her kids as well is like, I can't have you, no one can, to Latasha. And to everybody who loves these kids, like, this is what you get. And to the kids as well. Like, that's what makes this, in my mind, such a horrific, brutal tragedy that I hate to say it, but like domestic violence is, it happens all across Canada, all across the world. Every little town of 3,000 people have some guy who's, not too many steps away from this sort of thing. And I don't know what the answer to that is, other than I can say for sure, I don't think police are adequately trained or adequately powered to be able to protect women from men like this, or men from women who would do something like this,
Right.
because it's not one way or the other. But
It's so much more common than I think lots of people think. Like domestic violence is, and it's a broad spectrum, but it's very, very common.
like it doesn't always exhibit itself this way, but many mass killings have an aspect of domestic violence within them. That was something here in Nova Scotia. We had Portapic, the mass shootings, and that's allegedly starts with a domestic violence incident between the gunman and his at the time common law partner. But during like this inquiry that they did into that case, that was something that they spent a considerable amount of time on, is discussing the link between mass killings and mass shootings with domestic violence
Oh,
incidents.
wow.
And it was like it was pretty startling stuff. If you're worried about preventing mass killings committed by adults, a good red flag to start with is like, look at people who are charged or accused in domestic violence incidents, because they're often the ones that are capable of doing it.
Absolutely. And what lots of people don't realize is that domestic violence isn't just hitting another person. It's punching holes in walls. It's throwing things. You don't need to make contact with another person for it to be domestic violence. If you're
Mm.
constantly screaming at each other, that's domestic violence. Like,
Yeah, it's just if you try to control and manage your relationship through fear and aggression
Yeah.
and those kind of acts. It's that's a part of it, and that's the end of that could be something like the Tisdale tragedy. Is like you lose control of the relationship. Maybe you're caught doing something you shouldn't have been doing. Maybe you think she's going to go back with Jason, who again, the kids, we didn't really get into this, but the children were calling Steve dad for a long period of time. But a point came where their biological father, Jason, came back into their life. And at that point, they began to call him dad and not Steve.
Right.
And I just wonder, and he was said to be jealous of Jason, the biological
Well,
father. So
remember, we don't have lots of details. So like on the surface level, it's like, oh yeah, that's really that whatever. It's tough, but you never know. Like you never know. Latasha could have said, call Steve dad. And the kids could have been like, do I have to? Like, we don't know. We don't know what the vibe was, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think in trying to understand, like, I think when I hear this story, especially one that involves crimes against children, I want to understand how this could happen and what happened. That's why I wish I had more information on this case. But again, without a trial, which is unnecessary, or some kind of inquiry into it, this everything we talked about tonight is what's available publicly.
I was also surprised at how little there is available. But and then we read that no details would come out because no criminal charges were laid, which for obvious reasons. So that must be the rule, is details for any case, unless there's criminal charges, nothing like that's released other than hearsay.
Hell yeah. Well, I think as far as the Tisdale tragedy goes, we'll never understand exactly what happened, but I think tonight we came about as close to it as we could.
Do I want to understand? My brain's not wired to understand.
Yeah. I want somebody to understand and train police and anyone involved in this to prevent things like this from happening whenever it can. If we can't understand it, I hope those people can.
Yes, absolutely. More social workers. Less cops, more social workers.
Well, let's wrap up this one for tonight. Next time we meet, we will be talking Encounters with Creeps.
Those ones are always so good.
That'll be a nice break from
this one was heavy.
Madeleine, you mentioned at the top of the episode you had released a podcast.
I did.
How do people listen to it? Give us the Cole's Notes. What's going on?
You can listen to Madeleine Klein Presents Life After Aryan on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. The full episode you can find on my YouTube channel at Madeleine Klein.
It's called Life After Aryan. What's with that?
So a few months ago, I read a book called Autobiography of a Recovering Skinhead, and it just it made me dive into a rabbit hole of the skinhead culture of the late 80s and early 90s. And I ended up in my rabbit hole search finding some, old skinheads. And I messaged a bunch of people on Facebook. That's where I found them. And one guy got back to me and he said he'd be willing to talk to me. And I just wanted to really hear about his experience. And in talking to him, not only did we talk about his experience in the skinhead scene back in the day, we start talking about, he spent 20 years in state prison. So we start talking about his life in prison, his life after prison, and it just kind of snowballed into something else. But I really enjoyed talking to him, and I really enjoyed making the episode, and I'm very, very proud of it. So give it a listen and let me know what you think about it.
Well, Madeleine, thanks for another night. This is a dark one. We both have kids. It's hard to talk about kids, so I appreciate you going through this one with me.
I said this in a past episode. I don't know which one, but it took me having a kid to really appreciate kids more. And I still love true crime, but the cases with kids involved, they hit different now. They're just, yeah.
You get this weakness that you've never had before and this vulnerability, and that's just something that weighs on me.
Absolutely. You really tune into how evil the world can be. and it's not great. It's a little scary, actually.
I want to thank you for joining Madeline and I for this episode of Nighttime. This story was difficult to research and uncomfortable to discuss, but as we said during the episode, knowing the worst case outcomes for these cases, be it mental health or domestic violence, allows us to understand how serious these issues are. This isn't the first, and sadly, it's probably not going to be the last time something like this boils over. My thoughts and my best wishes go to everyone touched by this story. I should also say that this episode came as the result of a listener request. I want to send a thank you to Tiff for helping shine a light on domestic violence and its possible outcomes. If anyone else listening has a story they'd like to hear discussed, please visit nighttimepodcast.com/contact and let us know. Now with that all said, I'm going to start wrapping up this episode, but before I do, let me end with some thanks. First, a big thanks to Madeleine Klein for spending another evening with us. A big shout out to Monty Data, who contributes the music for this series. A thanks to LJ from Dystopian Simulation Podcast, who provides my intro and outro voiceovers. And then lastly, but most importantly, a massive thank you goes out to each and every one of you listening to Nighttime, as without your interest and your support, this show would be as pointless as it would be impossible. Now on the topic of support, let me thank the newest subscribers to the premium feed. Deborah, Kelly, and Lauren, I appreciate you. And for anyone else who'd like to support the show, you can help us out here in a variety of ways. First of all, a premium feed subscription costs just a couple dollars a month, and that money funds the creation of new episodes. But the premium feed will also give you those episodes 2 days early, give them to you ad-free, and give you access to a full back catalog of Nighttime episodes. If that sounds like something you're interested in, you can go premium right now at nighttimepodcast.com/subscribe. And even if you don't want to go premium, you can still help the show by sharing this episode on social media and letting all your like-minded friends know that you listen. If anyone out there has any story ideas, wants to give feedback on the show, or would like to submit a question or comment to be aired in an upcoming episode, you can reach us at nighttimepodcast.com. We're excited to hear from you. But until then, take care of each other, hug your loved ones tight, and let us know if you see anything weird.
The Nighttime Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Jordan Bonaparte.
We're here again at the Tisdale Trailer Park, where a mother and 3 of her children were killed earlier this week. As the day has gone on, a steady stream of friends and town residents and others have been bringing stuffed animals, flowers, and other mementos to lay beneath a tree here. Earlier today, we were in Nipawin, about 50 kilometers north, where we spoke to the deceased woman's parents. They're extremely distraught. They want people to know that she was a loving mother, and the kids were lively, energetic, athletic kids who loved their mom, and who will be missed by people in Nipawin, Tisdale, and all over this region.